So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to me to chair this panel titled Searching for Online Media's Business Models in Turkey. First of all, I have to apologize because I forgot my badge, but unfortunately today we all woke up with a very bad news, and I was focusing to follow the updates who came from Syria during the night. My name is Marta Ottaviani. I'm an Italian journalist working mainly for La Stampa newspaper, and I have been following Turkish politics since 2002. We are here today because we often talk about censorship and press freedom in Turkey, and of course we must go on doing that. The situation is still very dramatic, and I'm sure that during this, the question session or their speech, our panelists will be willing to give us some updates here. But during this panel, we wanted to discuss also how independent journalism is still surviving despite of all, and how the landscape is changing in Turkish journalism for all those who want to follow the political and economic developments in the country. To do so, I have here with me today three most welcome panelists, and I'm going to introduce them. Yavuz Baydar. Yavuz is a prominent Turkish journalist currently living abroad, and since a few months the founder and the editor-in-chief of Ahval, an online independent newspaper who is doing a great job covering Turkey in three languages: English, Arabic, and Turkish. Yavuz will explain us the broad lines and story of this new media, and also which is also a very interesting ground case study. Welcome, Yavuz.
Thank you.
Servet Yanatma. Servet is an independent researcher and journalist from Turkey and is currently a visiting fellow at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. Servet is also the author of a very insightful and exhaustive research about the Turkish media system in 2016, and he will show how the media crackdown has changed the sources of news in Turkey, increasing the role of online media as the main news sources, and how political leaning play a role in news consumption and the main challenges of digital-born news media. Welcome, Servet. And then Sarphan Uzunoglu. Sarphan is an associate professor in the Arctic University of Norway, and he contributes to platforms such as journo.com.tr and Pyramid.org, which are gaining more and more audience because they are basically considered reliable, and there is possible to find their news and reports generally hidden in the mainstream media. With him, we'll see existing business models and the labor relations of digital newsroom, trying also to understand how this platform can survive economically. Well, first of all, from my side, I want to thank deeply the International Journalist Festival of Perugia for organizing this panel, because it's a precious opportunity to explain once again what's going on in Turkey, because I repeat it again, the situation is increasingly dramatic. I think it is very important to gather here because we must go on in explaining what's happening there. I lived in Istanbul for 8 years as correspondent from 2005 and 2013, and I assure you that it is most unbelievable to explain how the country, the media system, but also the general attitude of people changed in such a short time. When I arrived in Turkey, the environment was definitely more energetic and free. There were several newspapers with a different political orientation, and I clearly remember how Turkish people were willing to exchange views and give their reading on the political or economical situation. With the years, and in particular after the brutal ending of Gezi Park revolt, people started to be more prudent and in a short time to practice self-censorship. In a couple of years, I saw newspapers disappearing or changing their orientation. And even around 2012, I clearly remember that I started to find some media online like Bianet or Diken more interesting, more reliable than the so-called mainstream media, because in these media, the editorial staff and the political orientation was changing rapidly. So Yavuz, I would like to start with you and your Ahval as a case story that can certainly explain how independent journalism is changing to fight against this situation, and above all, how we can find impartial information nowadays in Turkey.
Thank you, Marta. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Please bear with us when we take you through this painful journey of ours. You know, journalism is what we do and what we have, and we have to survive. We have to do what we are doing in any environment, no matter what the conditions are, and just keep going and keep informing the public and keep the public discourse as open and diverse and pluralist as possible. I am here this morning to talk to you about an alternative media platform and that I and my colleagues, a small group of colleagues, have established in order to better cover Turkey 6.5 months ago about some of the things that we have achieved over the time. Some of you may be aware that state of present media freedom environment inside Turkey, I'm sure you've been following that ordeal. To put it concisely, there are over 150 journalists. To be perhaps more precise, as far as I know, as of yesterday, the number was 158. And this number is fluid, it changes from day to day. New arrests, detentions, some releases, and this is mainly keeping the number above 150. And there is an ongoing state of emergency, which I personally believe will never be lifted until consolidation of power as eternal leader for Mr. Erdogan, President Erdogan, is in reality. And project of media takeover by the government is going ahead in full steam without any blockage or slowing down. It is no exaggeration to say that in today's Turkey, any expression deemed critical of the government, especially should it come from someone politically vulnerable, can be presented to the judiciary as evidence of one crime or another. A single tweet, for example. Whether that be applauding terrorism, hate speech against Turks or Sunnis, religious, or else insulting the institutions, statesmen, the parliament, prime minister, and of course the president. And our website has not been exempt from these problems. Here you see the various sides. This is a trilingual website, English, Turkish, and Arabic. Maybe you can jump to the Turkish one and Arabic one as well, so we can look at it while I'm presenting the details. Our website, as I said, has not been exempt from the problems, from the challenges. Direct access to the site has been banned by a court order about almost nearly 2 months ago, and our staff received a warning from a so-called journalist who is linked to the secret services, and those left inside Turkey had to, there were a few, they have to leave the country. And one of our brave contributors, our writers and commentators on the Kurdish issue, Ms. Nurcan Baysal, is now facing a potential jail sentence of up to 3 years for her objections to Turkey's military adventures and incursions inside Syria to Afrin enclave. That is before you consider the large proportion of our colleagues who had already been forced to flee or found themselves unable to return to Turkey on fairly generic and nonsensical, all of them are, charges of terrorism between the time of the 2016 coup attempt and the present day. Myself, this is the adventure for the second time, a second cycle in my life, having been first accused of being an anarchist or communist when I was 18 by the military in mid-1970s, and now accused of being what? I have absolutely no idea. Accusations are often these days in Turkey a cocktail of brands such as traitor or agent or PKK member or Gülenist organization member or simply a criminal. So what makes matters worse is that in most of our cases, our lawyers cannot have access to the files. As long as state of emergency continues, those files are claimed to be classified unless one accused surrenders to the law enforcement. And until then, we are kept in a limbo. So many of us have no idea what we are supposed to be accused of. It could be one single tweet, it could be something else. That is explaining to you, I hope, that this is the pattern of criminalization of a profession as a whole, as long as it is independent, free, and pluralistic in a way that it defends the basic values and standards of journalism. So criminalization means, of course, demonization of a profession. So automatically, it is the most endangered profession in Turkey right now. It is seen with great suspicion and with basically our colleagues at high risk walking on a minefield in Turkey. Many media outlets have been simply shut down on the basis of accusations, complicity with terrorism, therefore. Other smaller outlets have had government appointees, trustees placed in charge to wreak havoc until they die of their own accord. The latest example is a pro-Kurdish newspaper, which was severely harassed by the legal measures, and a trustee was appointed on that newspaper. And the government has now perfected a more permanent way of disciplining the media. Through a combination of large state bank loans and the issuance of state construction tenders and contracts to their cronies, they have succeeded in transferring large swaths of media into hands that in most cases literally cannot afford to cross them. The sale in 2008 of a large media group, including Sabah newspaper, where in earlier, better times, as an ombudsman, I was working as an ombudsman until I was fired due to my critical conduct of work during Gezi Park protests. The newspaper was taken over by pro-government Çalık Holding as a sort of a strong pattern in that process. It has since changed hands several times between pro-government businessmen as a form of pass the parcel in which everyone takes their turn to share the burden, but it has never been anything but subservient to the present government's every wish. As many of you might have read, the latest iteration of this process has finally led to the gobbling up of Doğan Media Group, the last remaining large independent media group, approximately having between 25 or 30% of the media sector as a whole. And this happened recently, about 2 weeks ago. And gobbling up of that last remaining semi-independent, I would say, rather limping media group, it was already damaged by self-censorship to a large scale, means that Turkish media, for a long time, in the past 5-6 years, as a sectoral phenomenon, on life support until now is put to sleep. The game is over. The Turkish media is now enslaved by a person who is in for a full-scale power grab. So the end of mainstream media as independent voice is now done, the end of it. What does one do if one is watching the slow motion elimination of voices within Turkey and fears for the future of the country? We look to a model of overseas media that dissident voices in other countries in the Middle East had long ago been forced to adopt, that of publishing in London or Geneva or Berlin, and avoiding putting ourselves in a position where we could have either our opinions on the government policies of the time or the facts we should or we should not acknowledge dictated to us by the government back home. We adopted a model that sought to both pay attention through reporting to the issues of the day and to allow us to publish expert voices on the true meaning of these events, analysts or commentators. We sought to cover in depth in a way that other news outlets could not or would not do the major trials that Turkey has undergone in the international arena and the economy, as well as providing unique insight into the ongoing dynamics in domestic politics and foreign policy issues. What was once an alternative media environment in Turkey, and I would say also economy, to about 60% of the content. What was once an alternative media environment in Turkey, comprising independent outlets such as Ahval, Biyanet, Diken, Özgürüz, Artı Gerçek, T24, and that's about it. That's more or less all. And several other tiny ones committed to publishing freely despite the situation we find ourselves in, has now become in some way the avant-garde of the Turkish media, together. Able to break the stories others are unable to break, and able to take into account political positions that other outlets are unable to consider. Political colorings or inclinations may vary between these outlets, but what we all do, as I counted these names and brands, is journalism. Sometimes, especially in stories deep within the fog of war in Syria, an unpredictable phenomenon, as we noticed last night, our work requires us to be polyphonic and to give voice to competing narratives, sometimes conflicting narratives, in order that readers understand where the fault lines of the political debate are and where the ambiguities in existing narratives are located. And in a very short 6 months, our baby, Ahval, in English, Turkish, and Arabic, as I said, has grown into a respectable-sized vehicle for Turkish voices of all kinds to speak freely away from the din of polarization that rages outside our gates. We have made our name by being skeptical and thinking deeply about the issues while turning no one away on the basis of their politics. We have tried to build a kind of sanctuary in which people can describe what is happening and consider paths of action, away from the slanderous point scoring and worse that now pervades the Turkish mainstream media, or so-called mainstream media. In that time, we have been able to welcome over 7.3 million visitors and have increased our average hits from 1,200 a day after the first month to around 60,000 a day today. Of course, and more data in a critical viewpoint will be delivered by Sarphan Uzunoglu about how Ahval is doing in terms of stats, etc. Of course, we have a long way to go. And the polarization, both outside in the society and within the journalist corps in Turkey, and the future of Turkey is certainly uncertain. But we will continue striving to provide readers from Turkey and from the world over with a picture of events as they actually happen, and no matter how various vested interests would like them to be portrayed. We will go on informing the public, as I said, keeping a very diverse, pluralistic public discourse platform in Ahval as a brand of independence and freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yavuz, for this speech, a speech which depicts perfectly, unfortunately, the current situation. I just want to underline that in Turkey there are several journalists in jail, if I remember well, 160. 58, but there are dozens of journalists left without a job. And now, basically, there are some families where no one has a monthly salary because both of the member of the family left without a job because maybe one was a journalist and the other one was an academic. So it is a very dramatic situation. And
I would add that in the question and answer part, if there are questions about Doğan Media Group purchase, perfect. I will give you more things about the situation.
And I was just only before giving the floor to Servet, I just want to underline that also foreign correspondents are starting to have problems. Someone received threats or warnings, and in some cases, some correspondents saw their face published on a Turkey newspaper with the title, "These are the enemies of Turkey." And I mean, it's not a comfortable situation at all. So, Servet, till this time, we spoke about people who write, so journalists. Now, let's see the people who follow the journalistic environment and the media market, how it's changing, and above all, what about the online sector and the social media one, please?
I would like to focus on online news media consumption in Turkey. I will provide research-based data on online media landscape in Turkey and discuss the role of digital-born news media in Turkey. The role and use of online media in Turkey have significantly increased in recent years. It can be attributed to mainly two reasons. One is a general trend from traditional media to the online media, and it also reflects the growing access to internet and smartphones. When we look at the survey of Reuters Institute here, it's an online survey, so it represents mostly urban Turkey. We see that 90% of participants use the online media as a source of news in the last week. TV follows it with around almost 80%, and there is no any remarkable change over time. However, when we look at the main news source over time, the share of online media, which includes social media, has gradually increased over time in the last 3 years. And then 39% of the respondents said that online media is their main news source in 2017, where television is 47%. And the shares of printed media and radio is just 6% as a main news source. The age also plays a significant role in the high use of online media, as Turkey has a very young population. The younger groups are much more likely to use social and digital media as their main source of news, while the older groups, older age group, prefer TV, print, etc. This pattern also holds in Turkey. What we see is that online news is the main source for the 18-24 age group, and then online and TV are equal for the 25 and 34 age group, with 42%. For respondents over 35 years old, TV is the main news source, and respondents younger than 35 years old, online media is the main news source. But the second and more important reason the online media has increasingly become an alternative platform for news. Temel Karamollaoğlu is the leader of Saadet Party, which is the continuation of Welfare Party that the ruling party emerged from, tweeted last month, 3 weeks ago, if the Sultan has the media, we have the social media. The truth cannot be hidden with pressure and embargo. It is clear that Karamollaoğlu is unhappy that TV stations and newspapers don't cover their events and statements. One example how the ruling party largely controls the televisions is about the coverage of the historic referendum last year. In this referendum campaign, Yes campaign received 458 hours coverage in televisions, whereas no campaign did only 45 hours. On the one hand, 458 hours, on the other hand, 45. In such an atmosphere, live stream through Periscope and YouTube have increasingly become popular for free media like Medyascope TV and Özgürüz. They are very important platforms for free journalism in Turkey. Even former ministers of the ruling party use these channels to make statements because they are not allowed to make statements in or television, participate in television discussions. It is not a coincidence that, upon the request of the ruling party, a new law on internet broadcasting was accepted last month in the parliament. It delegates the watchdog power for strict regulation of the internet broadcasts. The law requires online media, video streaming companies and pay TV services to apply for a license from the watchdog. Access can be blocked if the permits are not secured. The figure showing the main news source by political leaning explains the reason why the ruling party needed such a law, license for internet broadcasting. The main news source varies with political leaning, as we see in the figure. Online media is the primary source for left-wing respondents in the survey with 42%, whereas TV is for those on the right with 58%. Social media also used more by left-wing respondents in the survey with 18% than those on the right with 8%. High use of online news and social media on the left, let's say, might be because these respondents are seeking out more alternative news, as the televisions and newspapers are largely controlled. When we look at the top online brands in 2016 and 17, we see that they are mostly websites of televisions and newspapers. The ones underlined with dark blue are digital borns. There are also some digital-born news aggregators, namely MyNet, Haberler, Internet Haber here, you can see. But they don't generate their own news stories, but republish the stories of news agencies, newspapers, and televisions. There is almost no any digital-born news media that produce its own exclusive stories on the top. We have only Oda TV here. They are all the websites of televisions, newspapers, or news aggregators. As the coverage of televisions and newspapers are, let's say, largely controlled, these top online brands, their coverage is also controlled. Remember, online media is the main news source with 39%. When we look at the distribution of online media, we see the same situation. The percentage of social media is 13, and the percentage of websites of or applications of digital-born media is only 7 points. In short, the websites or applications of traditional media constitutes almost half of the online media. We have this figure, sorry. Of course, as Yavuz has just explained, there are more digital-born news brands day by day, but their usage remains limited when we compare with the top online brands. However, they are still crucial for free journalism and providing alternative news in Turkey. To name a few, you see Oda TV, T24, Diken, Bianet, Ahval, Medyascope, Juno, Artı Gerçek, Özgürüz. At the beginning, some of them also provided a platform for fired journalists and columnists to continue their work despite the low salaries. However, they have mostly failed to establish a sustainable business model for their financial survival so far. That's the reason why they cannot hire full-time experienced reporters for investigative journalism. Reporters who cannot earn their lives by freelance journalism go out of business. And this has a death blow impact on investigative journalism in Turkey. I would like to lastly make a few comments about main challenges of digital-born news media. The biggest challenge for them is financial. They are mostly not based on a sustainable business model. I'm sure Sarphan will comprehensively will explain it. They are funded by NGOs or international funds. Foundations and international institutions increasingly provide support for them. However, the main challenge here is still sustainability, as institutions and foundations are not neutral. Their interests may change over time or may lose interest. Crowdsourcing has emerged as another option in the last years in Turkey, but we have to say that it's not common in Turkey. While it provides editorial independence, sustainability is still a challenge in this model as well. What is more, there is the fear of government surveillance in this option, because people believe that the government monitor their payments, credit card, etc. So they may think that it's not secure for them to support for these media outlets. Online subscription seems generally to be best business model. However, there is a major doubt as to whether it can work, as paying for online news in Turkey is extremely rare. I think this era can be a transition period, given that there is no stable legal environment for media investments, as it only requires an order from a judge for a website to be blocked or closed entirely. There is a little prospect for anti-government publications to make money. It seems that it will take time for significant online investment, particularly from big companies and international players. Thank you for listening to me, and for more details about this data, the report on Turkey is available at the website of Reuters Institute.
Thank you. Thank you, Servet, for the explanation of this very interesting research. In particular, reading that, I was impressed by figures regarding social media, because if I remember well, there are something like 15,000 accounts blocked now in Turkey on Twitter and so on, because they are accused to, be against the government or against the operation in Afrin. And as a foreign... 110,000. And it is, as a foreign correspondent, is something I can get used even after such, after some years, because if you are in Turkey, you have a very limited audience to follow on the social media. If you are outside Turkey, you are a bigger audience on social media, and in Turkey you can follow some accounts only with a VPN system on your computer, and now the Turkish government is trying to block also VPN systems. So the situation, even, the ways to overcome censorship in Turkey are becoming more and more obstaculated. So, Sarphan, Servet talked about online media and online platform, but let's try to understand how this platform can survive economically, and also, how can you organize your everyday job on this online platform?
Thank you very much. I already uploaded the text of my presentation to medium.com because I feel that it is the best way of keeping people in touch with it. I'm more interested in business models and labor conditions in markets. I'm not I'm a critical in terms of economy, besides being critical in terms of politics as well. Because most of these new independent news outlets are doomed to fail. They're all gonna fail, that's for sure. And they're failing, and I'm gonna show it with some statistics. I think that there are 4 main points that we need to be careful about while we are discussing online news media models in Turkey. First, we need to be brave while discussing journalistic labor. And also, we have to be honest to ourselves regarding that of traditional media outlets in Turkey. It's a kind of delusion that Cumhuriyet bir gün and Evrensel is going to live. They are not. Thirdly, we should focus on how new media outlets may survive in this new media era with these new rules, with their low reader engagements, unqualified content production, and I think that insufficient content delivery strategies. And last of all, we have to be critical about our existing perspectives of income models, and we have to be clear about our journalistic aims and ethical positions. We should never forget that Turkey's media outlets cannot act free from global trends and discussions, and we shouldn't isolate ourselves from global crisis of journalism. I will start with journalistic condition or journalistic labor's condition. Let's start one by one. I use the term precarious while I am discussing this term. Precarious is a term that is being used by scholars for decades. It was used by Bourdieu the first in 1960s, and it has been conceptualized by Guy Standing. It is flexibility and insecurity of labor at the same time. And in Turkey, all of the journalists are now experiencing this same condition. No matter where you are working, no matter in what level you are working, are you whether working on full-time position or part-time position, and it's the same everywhere, it's the same in Italy, I guess, as well. So while we are talking about the precarious journalistic labor, we should look at some different layers of security and flexibility. First of all, I am an academic, and there's a riot going on in England right now. Italian academics are not also happy with their payments and working styles. Most of the cognitive workers are going through the same crisis. That's why I say that Turkey is part of a global crisis. So I would like to focus some interesting things. Precarity in Turkey for whole journalists is not only dependent on politics, it's dependent on economics as well. Since 1990s, the Unionization movement in Turkey has destroyed all Turkey's newsrooms. Most of the people tend to tell Turkey's story saying that everything got worse starting by 2010. Yeah, it is just a bad story. I don't see things this way. But the most important part here is Turkey's online media experience and independent newsrooms experience is really interesting, and we need to make some points in order to make it understood better. Here are some statements I make about journalistic labor. First of all, journalists don't feel secure about their payments, especially when they're working with these digital news outlets, because they don't have a written contract. Most of them are working on part-time or working on piece by piece. And laws do not regulate working relations between freelancers, especially in journalism industry. Even if you call someone from ministry to observe the situation, they never come. That was the case when Ahmet Şık, who has gone to prison twice, was fired from his position in Radikal, just because he was part of the union and he was a good journalist. And the most important part here is it is same with digital news outlets. No matter which one you're working for, you can never be sure that when you are going to be paid. And the second is they don't have the insurance. But being a journalist in Turkey, as you might all recognize, is really risky. And exiled newsrooms also create political and legal risk for journalists in the field. Yeah, let's face the reality. There are some people who are living still in Turkey and they're trying to be journalists. And all the financial transactions in their accounts coming from exiled newsrooms can create a problem for them. We should look for some alternatives. So, according to the lack of copyright ethics in Turkey, that's another thing. For instance, you are producing a content from Journal.com.tr, but it is used anywhere else. Nobody is paying you. So it's a kind of big crisis in terms of ethics and economics at the same time, and demand for the freelance reporters' labor is decreasing due to this copyright ethics. As it was just said, everybody is producing the same news pieces. There is a great crisis of quality. So I would like to go to the delusion of printing thing. Sorry, thank you very much. This delusion of printing is really much worse than expected. Here are some of the figures. These are just random days in March 2018, December 2016, and December 2015. Here you can see sales rates of some traditional newspapers. Not all of them, but here is their daily sales number. Here is Cumhuriyet, here is Bir Gün, and here is Evrensel. It is not even here. Oh, okay, it's here now. So there is a big problem over here. From 2015 to 2018, Evrensel's sales rates have been dropped so dramatically. For instance, it was let's go for Cumhuriyet. It was 50,000 in December 2015, and now it is 35,000. For Bir Gün, the case is it was 25,000. It became 19,000. Now it is 8,000. When Doğan Media was sold to Demirören Group, everybody said that it is a chance for the rebirth of the left-leaning media in Turkey. No, it is not. Nobody is going to buy Bir Gün, Evrensel, or Cumhuriyet instead of Hürriyet, because there are completely different products.
Yeah.
Yes, let's face our reality. These are products, and we are producers, and it is a market. It is an industry. So these kind of problems are following each other, but it is not only the case about sales rates of the newspapers, it is also about monthly estimated visits of these websites. Here you can see the statistics regarding the monthly clicks of the websites. It's like for Oda TV it's over 20 million, for Cumhuriyet it is over 20 million, but it is a monthly figure. It means that it's like 600,000 for the best one. In Turkey there are 80 million people. Assuming that 60 million of them are able to read, and assuming that at least 50 million of them have access to the internet, it is a failure. We are failing, and these business models are not working, especially for independent media outlets. Then I have some solutions or perspectives regarding the solutions over here. First of all, Evrensel, Cumhuriyet, and Bir Gün. I have to tell the reality. These newspapers are relying on official ads provided by government agency, and without them, Turkish media would never survive. So some people say that Turkish media is 90% pro-government. Let's face the reality. It is 100% government funded. Your readership does not matter at all for Turkish media. So why, for instance, Oda TV is so successful? I looked at all these news websites, and the most distinguishing part over here is that they have a comment section, for instance. Most of Turkish journalistic websites are afraid that they open a comment section and there will be trials, judges, and all other processes, legal processes. But we never offer readers some engagement. But most of the websites which belong to mainstream media models elsewhere is doing so. We don't provide Facebook groups for discussions. Our authors are not participatory. They're not participating anything, any discussion or any other thing. And I would like to also finish with some different things. For instance, in Turkey, Cumhok, Cumhuriyet Readers Group, was a really wonderful thing. But think of the American example and the English examples. Now, most of the mainstream media and alternative media channels, for instance, in Sweden, this news outlet called Blank Spot has too many Facebook groups in order to follow up the news stories, and the reporters are actively responding to readers. Turkish alternative media is kind of a hubris that isolate readers from themselves. This is not a business model. It's like there's nothing unlike a kind of party media or kind of classical fascist media in alternative media as well. We don't have academic references to our reader audience. We don't do any surveys over them. The only platforms that create surveys for their readers are platforms like Doğruluk Payı, Teyit, and this kind of new wave startups, which means that Turkey's political problems and legislative problems are there. But I think that there is a problem regarding industrial standards. Most of the newsrooms don't have an educated advertiser on their boards. But once you go to an American newspaper, nearly 50% of their human resources are advertisers. And we are all relying on international non-governmental organizations or international support. It's not sustainable. One day it's going to end. And I don't think that it's going to a good place, because most of these non-governmental fundings limit your capability. In Turkey, most of the readership is about sports or magazine. None of the alternative medias have that. How are you going to attract these people? So I think that's my whole. But in this era of hyper-commercialization and hyper-individualization, we have to re-look at ourselves, and we need to re-evaluate where we are. We need to reconsider our relationship with reporters in the field. Because if reporters aren't secure, if reporters aren't qualified, if reporters don't feel that they are enough for this job, we cannot survive in terms of journalism in Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarphan. Thank you very much for your speech. I really like it. Also, unfortunately, I have to state that precarious journalists are not a problem only in Turkey. Maybe next year we can submit to Ariane and Chris a panel on this topic. And thank you also for speaking about economic difficulties in setting up new media and in managing the old ones. I remember perfectly every time I speak with my friends in Jurmuriet and in Birgun, for example, they have two kind of huge problems. The first one is with advertising, because no one wants to put advertising on their newspapers in order not to, be considered an enemy from the government or the ruling party. But there is another problem. Most of the times, the copies of the newspaper disappears outside of the kiosk. In the early morning, when the distributor comes and leaves the newspapers, then the police, most probably, comes as well, and then you are not able to buy Jurmuriet or Birgun or Evrensel. Also, I want to remember that the total circulation of this newspaper is about 3.1 million.
In Turkey.
In Turkey, okay.
In total.
And Turkey has a population of 80 million, and so these no mainstream newspapers are really a minority in the journalistic landscape of Turkey. So thank you very much to all our panelists. We have now almost 20 minutes for your questions, so if you have some questions about the topic of this panel, please don't be shy.
You mentioned, thank you for the presentations. I'm Nick Newman from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. I was interested in the free media that you talked about and showed. How are they able to operate? Why are they not being clamped down on? Are some of them from outside the country? Are they getting intimidated? Is it in the government's interest to let some of them operate because it's seen as, that they can turn around and say there is free media? What's going on for those media specifically?
So who wants to reply?
Maybe It can. The only thing I can say is it's a temporary situation. It's going to end by time. Government or any kind of government wouldn't let it. This kind of opposition. It's not. It's even Italy, United States. It doesn't matter. Governments don't fund oppositions as long as they are not completely utopic ones. That's my answer. That's not going to be. That's not sustainable. And these people in these newsrooms, these alternative newsrooms, they are aware about this fact.
May I also add that if I understand the question correctly, it is all a matter of prioritization of which medium the government in question has in mind. It's crystal clear in the case of Turkey and in the case of Russia is that the first medium to be clamped down on is TV. Because according to UNESCO, it's an unchanging figure, more or less. It's between 80 and 90% of the publics in Russia and in Turkey, and Ukraine too, I think, are only getting their information for free from TV channels, or maybe one single TV channel, whatever their preferences are. So correctly and smartly and cunningly, leaderships of these countries have first given the first priority on darkening this medium. If you see and roll the movie back in Turkish case, what Erdogan did since Gezi Park protests, this is where it began as a pattern, was to first attack the private TV news channels. And as of now, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but we are only ended up with Halk TV, which is broadcasting from some small apartment with 60 square meters from the middle of Istanbul. And that is the thing. I think they, in their radar screen, as Sarphan explained, newspapers of the alternative media don't matter at all. Nothing. And they can live as far as Mr. Erdogan is concerned or Mr. Putin is concerned. And regarding online media, it's a matter of time. Again, I would agree with Sarphan. It's just a step-by-step gobbling up of the media, and their time will come. And its time has come for Özgürüz, for example, immediately. Özgürüz, whose editor is Can Dündar, it was banned. So was Ahval. And there has been character assassination campaigns and mudslinging and smearing campaigns against remaining ones, El Monitor, Region, and those are targeted. And I think it's just not if, when.
Thank you. You just mentioned Özgürüz, and I have a question about that because as far as I know, they're funded also by a German organization, are mainly working from Germany. I'm from Germany, so I don't know about other cooperations like this, but how would you see Turkish cooperations with European countries or other countries in this whole online media scope? And also for the business models, because then there wouldn't just be funding from Turkey, or yeah.
I think Sarphan would be the one to answer to this, but let me briefly comment on this. The problem, and it's a problem now, that put financially struggling Cumhuriyet Daily at the epicenter, because it is really financially struggling at the moment. It's a matter of survival for the newspaper, is the funding potentially to be provided by the European Commission and in EU circles. And the problem immediately arises in this poisonous environment, how this funding could be channeled, for example, to a private enterprise like Cumhuriyet Daily, despite the fact that it's been run by a foundation. It is a Scott Trust model. And then comes a discussion within Cumhuriyet whether or not it would be used or abused by the law enforcement to launch another campaign as agents, traitors being financed by whatever. So having said that, we know that 120 plus million euros are reallocated for helping civil society, NGOs, and media, etc., etc., outside Turkey, for Turkey. But what I heard, sadly, that the bylaws or whatever, the regulation instructions for this, how this will be distributed, is pending for 5 months or 6 months. This is ridiculous. And people are being frustrated, people who are keen on helping these media institutions. And this is where we are.
I can only contribute with one sense. I can only contribute with one thing. This European Union supported newsrooms. They don't create a kind of good understanding for the public. Most of the time, astroturfers on social media or pro-governmental figures on social media are accusing you of being a foreign agent. It's just like the example of Russia. We don't have this law of foreign agent yet, but you know, Hungary has it. We can have it soon. The most important part is I am pro-hybrid models of finance in journalism. I think that something can be both funded by international organizations and it can be a company at the same time. But most of the Turkish reader audience and most of the journalists in Turkey are completely against it because understanding of leftism in Turkey has an interesting understanding of anti-imperialism. Once you get money from someone, you are spy for leftists as well. So these are big problems. And that's the case with Özgürüz. And I would like to add something. Both Özgürüz and Ahval has been banned by the government to the access. I don't have the data about Özgürüz, but Yavuz Bey provided me with the data about Ahval News. They're also an exiled newsroom. And I can easily see that after they have been banned, their traffic is going down, and it is a kind of dramatic decrease in the trade. It's a dramatic fall. They have somehow survived so far, but for instance, there is a leftist platform in Turkey called Sendika.org. Now they are like Sendika 85 or Sendika 65. I'm not pretty sure. They have been banned for many times. So it is not sustainable, and it impacts your daily clicks. It impacts your cost per view advertising strategy, especially if you are relying on Google AdSense. So European Union cooperations really matter, but we have to depend on our independent business strategies as well.
Hi. I'm David Levy, also from the Reuters Institute. 2 questions. Firstly, Cumhuriyet. I was really surprised at the low levels of sales of 30,000 a day, I think you were saying. And I just wondered, is that something that's happened in the last, since 2010? If you go back sort of 8 years, was it selling many, many more copies? That's the first question. And the second question was, I didn't fully understand what the government's internet registration law is going to do, and if somebody could just explain very simply and briefly what it's going to do to online media, that would be very helpful.
They just block access to websites, and you can only access it through VPN. But the problem, and they can do it immediately without a court order. There's a kind of council for this. And the most problematic sign is most of the VPN services in Turkey are also blocked. Yesterday, I spoke to a friend of mine, and he said that even Tor, the onion router, the most secure one, most of their servers are not working in Turkey. It means that neither of these websites are going to be accessible if they don't open new domains for themselves, and they are being banned maybe daily, maybe hourly. That's the thing.
Maybe what about the apps?
Apps is a kind of solution there, but the problem here is the government has also access to some markets like Apple Store and Google Play Store, and they can block your apps from national markets as well. So only really privileged users who know how to change their market in Google Play or iTunes are going to be able to access these kind of news sources. Cumhuriyet is not blocked yet.
The copies.
Why? It's a really political matter, I think, because Cumhuriyet was a secular newspaper, and it was more like nationalist seculars who are kind of more pro-Kemalist were reading Cumhuriyet. The readership profile of Cumhuriyet has changed dramatically. Most of my family members are Kemalists. I know from them they don't read Cumhuriyet anymore. There is a kind of political shift there. That's my opinion.
There are many elements that could be put in that pot, analyzing Cumhuriyet. As I said, huge debt meant that they could no longer invest on newsroom. They are really struggling in that field. It's very scarce number of original news, original stories. That's one, because of that, because of struggle. Second, within the newspaper there are divides, severe divides on where politically to place the newspaper. Third, as Sarphan mentioned, youngsters don't read newspapers anymore. Simple as that. And there was really no sophisticated considerations of how to approach that in a creative manner, so that young people would be attracted to Cumhuriyet. Appointment of Can Dündar, who is now in Berlin in exile, was part of that attempt to use it as a magnet to change the strategy. But I don't think Can had enough time to design such a strategy. Finally, I would say that the old malaise of the Turkish media continues. I would not call it directly partisan media, as we see that Cumhuriyet is not a part of partisan media, but it is discreetly so, representing a certain chunk or segment of Turkish society, staunchly, I would not use the word ultra-secular, but staunchly secular, Kemalist, and this is sort of polluting their way of approaching the content providing and avoiding some parts that is part of that allergy, which means the other newspapers are doing that too on the alternative media side. But the one hoped, of course, that Cumhuriyet would return to its basics, to a sort of a reference newspaper, as it was in the mid-80s, as a sort of flagship paper, defying the military rule. But for all these reasons, it's failing, unfortunately.
I saw an hand raised over there.
Just a quick question of clarification. I didn't get a point in Sarpat's presentation about how exiled journalists put in danger journalists in the field.
Yeah, that is from my in-depth interviews with the journalists in the field while I was writing my PhD thesis. And they were all saying that they don't feel secure. They don't have the insurance. They are not paid regularly. And most of the heads of the exiled newsrooms are the people that are called as public enemy by the government. So you are working for them. So that's what makes it, problematic for them. And most of them are using their public open names while publishing their contents. They don't publish anonymous content. And my solution here is they can be paid by blockchain technologies like Bitcoin, etc. And they can publish their content anonymously and they can still be paid. So it will be secure for them. I don't know, but it won't be trustable for the audience. So there are pros and cons.
I would add, let me give you the example of Ahval, how we operate carefully as much as we can. We are covering mainly Kurdish provinces and also across the border. And we know that segment of Kurdish reporters, Turkish Kurdish reporters, our colleagues, they are braver than the other ones. And they had not many issues. I mean, everybody was aware that, there's a Turkish proverb saying, if you enter hammam, you sweat. Okay, so we are in this business knowing that we have entered hammam, and everybody knows that. They are taking that risks. They know that they are walking on the minefield. And it was up to each and every one of them to decide whether to enter and continue or drop out. But having said that, we know that we have to be very careful in bilateral communication, each and case by case, to see whether or not the reporter wants to use a pseudonym for a certain story. This is tiny part of our practice in order to protect, for example, if someone goes and speaks to a PYD Kurdish commander in Afrin, if he's or she is from Turkey, it's a case of deciding whether or not, to protect the identity. And then the case exactly like in Özgürüz or Ahval, etc., or Artıgerçek, which was really, case of arrest in the Artıgerçek case, to find somebody covering Ankara, the center field politics. Ankara is very sensitive, and many of our colleagues refrained from that. Their refraining is not fully from being afraid, but because of political, ideological, I would say, pollution, some of them have jumped on the same boat as the official language, character assassinations, branding these websites like this is a PKK website, this is a FETÖ website, etc. And even some leftist, I would say, colleagues jumped on that boat and then started believing that this may be true, etc., etc. Without judging the output of these websites like Özgürüz, Artıgerçek, and Ahval. And it's a mishmash of these things. But risks have become clear in the case of Artıgerçek, for example, that the authority is knowing no boundaries, and a female reporter or editor, Sibel Hürtaş, was arrested for some time. So the editors are really in Turkey. If you employ editors in Turkey, they have to really know that they are on the center of the minefield. It's a daily struggle, and it's a very sensitive one, particularly if you are banned,
Dennis Redmond. I teach international media at the Graduate School of Journalism here in Perugia. What you're all saying is that there is a new class of quote-unquote censors or controllers of the media in Turkey. Who are they? How do they work? Do they work as Russian trolls? Do they sabotage? Is there a single direction? Under what umbrella do they work? It seems as if this class has expanded because it's obviously blocking all these sites. So who are these people? What are their origin? And how are they directed? I haven't seen any of this in your presentation.
Actually, there is an organized power in social media, kind of pro-government. There is opposition coordinated as well in these ways, in terms of astroturfers. So these people are either paid by specific organizations or by the government, like in the Russian model or post-Soviet countries models. But some people are doing it with their public names, just in order to get a career for themselves. Just blaming someone of being part of this cocktail terrorism and saying that, yeah, he's one of them and I am pro-government, so you should give me a reward. That's the main understanding. Yeah, they're paying some people, and there are some networks of trolls and astroturfers created by some journalists in Turkey, which we didn't have time to discuss about, but I can send you the link whenever you want.
Apparently, our time is over, if I have understood well. So, can we accept another short question? No. A short one. So, if there is a lady, please. I kindly ask you to be as short as you can.
Yes, I will ask a very short question. My name is Ans Boersma. I work as a Dutch journalist in Turkey. I have a question on TRT World, which presents itself as an international online medium platform. And I was wondering, if you go to their website, they have a very big audience, and if you go to their website, you don't see that it's coming from, it's paid by government money. but I know that a lot of my Dutch friends actually, they follow it because it's such a, I mean, they have a great online strategy. They compare themselves to Al Jazeera as well. They have a lot of international journalists working for them. So how do you think that the international audience can understand Turkey better, like the Turkey sources better?
At the end, TRT World is a public diplomacy tool, just like Al Jazeera is, or just like Telesur in South America is. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, we know that there are no many English broadcasting alternative media outlets in Turkey, but it is about journalistic quality in Turkey as well. Most of the journalists in Turkey don't know how to write properly in English, don't know how to edit properly in English, and it's a big problem. That's why TRT World and similar ones are dominating the field. So I don't have any suggestion.
Okay. I think that our time now is really over. So thanks to the audience for attending this speech. Thanks to Yavuz, Baydar, Servet, Yanatma, and Sarphan, Uzunoglu. And hopefully next year we'll be here to tell you that everything is changed, that Turkey is in a new era of press freedom. Let's try to be optimistic.